Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Me, Myself, and Die. I am, as always, your intrepid host, Trevor DeVal, doing something a little different here today. We're doing a live review of the Mythic Game Master Emulator version 2. It's live for my patrons and my YouTube channel subscribers. So hello, all of you who are here to join us for this live experiment. Thanks for coming out. We've got some people on the chat already. I'm going to be doing my best to try and address your comments and questions as we go. I'm going to try and get everybody in, but of course, I'm also trying to review the product as we go. So I'll try and get to everybody. Just sort of full disclosure here, I have the Mythic GME 2nd edition, obviously. I'm reviewing it. I haven't gone through it with a fine-tooth comb yet, but I've done a sort of cursory overview. So as we go through it, we are going to hear my thoughts on what I think works, on the organization of it, and mostly just sort of the general content about it and whether or not you think that it would be useful to you in your games, whether that's solo or running for a proper group. So yeah, I'm going to do my best to kind of go through this. I'm not going to be going through every little piece of it because it's a big book. It's got like, I don't even know, 300 pages or something, which sounded really daunting at first, considering that the first edition was so tiny, so compact. But you have to understand that this version of the game, or of the emulator, I should say, it's not really a game, compiles a lot of old material, like from the variation supplements and the stuff from the magazines and stuff. So it's chock full of a whole bunch of options here. So it's not like you have to use everything. This is the introduction. I'm not going to go over the introduction because, you know, if you don't know what role-playing is, then why are you here? Also, this introduction talks about the difference between solo role-playing and group play. And again, just to reiterate, this is a product that is useful both for your solo games and for your traditional group games, be they on virtual tabletops or otherwise. I have successfully used the first edition of this game with the solo stuff that I've done on the channel here. But I've also used it very successfully with a traditional group, whether that's using it in real time as I'm GMing, or whether it's using it to develop adventures beforehand. It's really, really good at that. The terms you need in this game are all listed right here. We go. Chaos factor, characters, what is a D100? What are fate questions? All this stuff, very, very, very useful. Interpretation, just all of the basics. It's just a great introduction to all the basic stuff. Again, I'm not going to go over it because I'm assuming that we all kind of know that. What I really want to focus on here is the differences between this and the first edition. So here we have the fate questions section. This is all pretty much the same. Largely, the way you do it is follow your expectations. That's actually huge, and that's something I'm always counseling is follow your instincts when you're interpreting things. Typically speaking, your first gut reaction is the one you want to go with. Not always, but as a rule of thumb, your first one is what you want to go with. Follow your expectations. Should this expectation be tested? If yes, then ask a fate question, and then you determine the odds. We'll get to the odds chart in a second because it's been streamlined a bit. Roll to determine your answer, to interpret the results, and then continue. That's basically how the whole emulator works. This section right here, this thing, that's the core of it right there. So then we get to the fate chart. Now, what is different here? Okay, well, the chart itself is different. If you have a look here, you can see that it's been streamlined quite a bit. Oh, Willona's Cave, thank you for your content and for demonstrating to the public that solo RPG can be fun. Well, thank you for being a channel member, Willona's Cave. Good to see you here. And that goes for all of you Patreon members as well. So the fate chart here used to have a whole bunch of possible odds, right? I forget how many, but there was something, maybe like 8 on either side of 50-50 here. This is a little different. This is just 4. You've got certain, nearly certain, very likely, unlikely, and then 50-50, and then unlikely, very unlikely, nearly impossible, and impossible. When I first saw this, I went, ooh, but I need all those options. But then when I was honest with myself and I thought, you know, how many times in the 2 seasons of the main show here on the channel that I used the Mythic chart, because the second season, of course, was Ironsworn, which has its own way of determining things. How many times did I really, really, really use all of those possible odds? And the answer is not a lot. To be absolutely realistic and to be honest, the vast majority of cases, I think, if I go through in my mind and remember, the vast majority of cases were, that's somewhat likely, or that's very likely, or that's a near sure thing, were kind of the main ones. All of the other ones didn't quite make it in. So when I see this revised chart, I'm like, actually, yeah, that makes sense. There's not a huge difference between whatever it was called, like very likely and, a near sure thing or whatever it was, right? There wasn't a huge difference. So this has been streamlined a little bit. Certain, near certain, very likely, and likely. Now, for those of you who don't know how this works, as I said, this is kind of the core of everything here. So every scene is a chaos factor. The chaos factor represents how in control or out of control the characters are. You start at 5, typically, and it goes from there. So if you are at chaos factor 5 and you are asking a question to the fate chart, is the door to the dungeon stuck, let's say? Well, the first thing you do is assign odds to it, right? Well, if you have no idea at all, it could either be one or the other, then 50-50 is your choice. And if you're at chaos factor 5, you do that and you get a string of 3 numbers, 10, 50, and 91. What this means is, if on a D100 roll, you roll 1 to 10, you get an exceptional result, an exceptional yes. If you get 11 to 50, you get a yes, a regular yes. If you get 51 to 90, that's a no result, and a 91 to 100 is an exceptional no result. Have I got that right? Because I screwed this up when I was talking about Ironsworn in my last video. I think that's right. I'm sure you guys will tell me here in the chat if I got it wrong, but I think that's right. Yes, lower is yes. As your chaos factor fluctuates and you choose the odds, then the potential results of your questions are going to change. So if you're at, say, chaos factor 7 down here, and it's a near certain thing you decide, then the whole screen goes blue. Then you look at that. And now on chaos factor 7, when it's nearly certain, a 1 to 19 is an extreme yes, 20 to 95 is a yes, 96 to 99 is a no, and a 100 is an exceptional no. So as you can see, as the chaos factor goes up and the odds go up, obviously the chances of a yes vastly improve. What that's designed to simulate is how things become chaotic and more possible. That is the actual definition of chaos, is all things are possible at once. If you've ever read any Michael Moorcock, you'll know that description. But so this is the simplified version of the chart. I like it. I think it's a good change, and I can see this being a little more useful at the table as well. Here we have just great examples of what each of these odds mean in different potential questions. So in this example, is the creature hostile? And you get different outcomes based on these different odds, right? So for example, if your question is, will this abandoned car start? And it's a very likely, then there's signs of recent use and it looks to be in good shape is your answer, right? If you roll, or if you're determining the odds on that thing. Yeah, so basically here, this is an explanation of the chaos factor values. Again, everything in this book is just, it's more of the same, more examples, more streamlining, more, hey, this is how this works, which is helpful, especially to someone who's new to this product. I have to remember that too, that I've been using this thing for years. So a lot of this is second nature to me, and it might not be to you if this is the first time you've looked at it. So higher values equal more yes answers and more random events. And more unexpected scenes, okay? Whereas lower chaos values equal more no answers, fewer random events, and more expected scenes. Okay, and we're going to get into what all of that means as we go through. Okay, and then there's some descriptions of what each answer means. A yes versus an exceptional yes. A no versus an exceptional no. And there's all kinds of ways to interpret this. Each one with its own examples. You can see here, right? Like, here's the description for what a no response means. A no response to a fate question means the answer is the next most expected outcome from what a yes would have meant. With simple questions, a no may be the opposite of a yes, and therefore easy to interpret. A complex question might require more interpretive legwork. And then there's an example in italics. There's an example after every single thing to really drill in how this works. Very, very useful and appreciated. Okay. Let's move on. And then we talk about random events. So how random events work in the game is if you are rolling on the fate chart, if you get a double number, as it says right here, When rolling D100 to answer your question, if you get a double number, like 11, 22, 33, and the single value of that number, 1, 2, or 3, falls within the range of the current chaos factor, then you've triggered a random event. And we delve into random events in the next chapter. So if your chaos factor is 5 and you roll a 44, boom, random event, or a 33, or a 22, or a 55, or an 11 becomes a random event, and so on and so forth. Random events are my favorite part of this whole system, as those of you who have watched my show will probably guess. I love crazy things that come up and force you to interpret them. And then we talk about adjusting odds and again, more things like that. Now here we have the fate check. So the fate check is for people who don't like rolling on tables. That's not me. I love me a table and I love me this table. This one, I'm not going to go over with great detail because it's not something I use, but you roll 2d10, but you add the dice together instead of treating them like a percentile, and then you make different adjustments based on the odds, and you compare it to a number, and it's not for me, so I'm not even going to talk about it. But for those of you who are interested in the alternate way of determining the outcome of the fate chart, this is explained well here. And again, we have this section here, when to run with expectations and when to question them. This is just general advice, general examples, chock full of it, which is great. Okay. And lots of things in here like using fate questions to replace RPG rules. It's assumed you're going to be using your favorite RPG of choice with Mythic kind of as an add-on to help you determine, well, to act as the GM, quite literally. It's called the GM emulator. But you can actually use just Mythic to determine the outcome of everything if you want. And so this section kind of talks about that. And then here we go again, the big fate question example. So this is a big detailed example of everything we've just seen in this chapter. Very, very, very helpful. And we move on now to the next section, which is random events. The types of random events. So there's basically two things here. You get random events from fate questions, like what we just talked about. If you're rolling in the chart and you roll the doubles, that is a random event. And then you get random events from interrupted scenes. An interrupted scene is a twist that derails your expectations about what will happen next to create a new surprise scene. They go into detail later in the scenes section about that. And then the details of generating random events. So you consider the context, determine the event focus, determine the event meaning, and interpret your results. Again, this is the core of the heart. The core of the heart of the core. The core of the heart of the center. Redundant and repetitive and redundant. This is the core of how what a random event is and how to handle it. Consider context. Context is king, baby. Context is king. Context is always king whenever you're using this system. You're always creating the situation based on what came before. That is the context of what is happening or what is currently happening in the scene, right? That is a number one most important thing. Consider the context, because that is going to go so far in determining the meaning of these numbers and words you're rolling, right? It's going to really help with interpreting what that means. You determine the event focus, and then you determine the event meaning and interpret your results. So the focus is what we're going to get into in detail here. It's basically, is it going to be about a PC thing? Is it going to be about an NPC? Is it going to be introducing a new thread? All that stuff. And then you determine the event meaning and you interpret. But again, this is stuff that those of you who know the system will be very familiar with. There's not a huge amount of changes here. Oh, there is one actually change that we should talk about. So this is the random event focus table. So when you roll a random event, the first thing you do is determine the event focus. It could be a remote event, an ambiguous event, a new NPC, NPC action, NPC negative, all this stuff. But then down here we have this one, current context. And as far as I know, this one is new. At least it wasn't in the first edition. So the current context is interesting because it basically just said, well, let's have a look, because we can see they go through and describe every single entry and what it means, all with examples. Great stuff. Very, very good. Move toward a thread, move away from the thread. Current context, here we go. So whatever is happening in the scene right now becomes the focus for this event. If the random event was generated from a fate question, then use the context of the fate question as the focus. If the random event was triggered as a scene interrupt, then the event is directly related to whatever's currently going on in your adventure. A random event with a focus of current context takes whatever's going on and adds a new layer to it. So the example here is about the player's gunslinger PC bursts into a barn expecting to find the bandit he's been pursuing. The player asks the fake question, is he in here? Because of course every gunslinger is going to sound like that. Mythic comes back with a no and a random event. The event focus table comes back with current context. The player thought this might be a big moment in the adventure, capturing the bandit, but they were wrong. This unexpected letdown is the context right now. Or this unexpected letdown is the context right now, and this random event will have something to do with that. So for example, in that exact scene, if he, instead of the gunslinger rolling current context, if he rolled introduce a new NPC, well, that's a very different outcome. But if it's current context, then, well, as per this example here, this unexpected letdown is the context right now, and this random event will have something to do with that. Depending on the event meaning generated, which is the next thing we're going to do, maybe the PC finds a taunting message scrawled on the wall, or discovers a bedroll in the corner indicating the bandit had been here but moved on. Because remember, this is in response to the context of the player asking, is the bandit here? And the answer was no. So there's something else that happens that sort of helps support that doesn't bring in some seemingly random thing like move toward a thread or introduce an NPC or something like that. Oh, you can also choose the focus as well in certain events. I mean, you can do anything you want. It's your damn game. But they talk about specifically when to choose the focus. And that will actually lead us into something that I think is an interesting development, and that is this right here, the adventures list. So in the first edition, you had one page, and on that page was a box for each scene, scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, with some lines in there to take notes. There was a space for chaos factor, so you could keep track of it. There was a list of characters, and there was a list of threads. That's a lot of information on one page. And if you look at my my chicken scratching, mad scrawling on those sheets as I'm running through seasons 1 and 3 of the show on this channel, it becomes, you have to write quite small. There's not a lot of room. And what would happen is, let's say you have a random event that says move towards a thread. Well, what you would do is you would look at your thread list, and let's say there was 9 of them. So you would say, okay, well, I don't know which one it is, so I'm going to roll a d10, because that's the dice closest to the number, and I'll just ignore 10 and roll again to randomly determine that. Well, what this does is it kind of helps organize that a little better. So this, as you can see, is now grouped, be it threads or characters, it's the same thing, into kind of subsections. You've got the 1s and 2s, the 3s and 4s, and each of these has a corresponding die type. So what does that mean? It means that when you are adding, let's say, characters to your list as you're going through the game, new characters are popping up, you're putting them in there, you write them, in here, and okay, there's the first one, there's the second one, there's the third one, and let's say you've got, 7 characters, okay, that have all emerged, and there's a random event that says NPC action. Okay, well, which NPC are you dealing with? You have 7. So in this organizational system, you look at where the last one is. In this case, it's right there, number 7. And you go, oh, look at this. It's either going to be in this group or in this group. So you roll a d4. And depending on which number comes up, that's the subgroup that you can roll on. Now, why is that important? Why is that different or better necessarily, or possibly, than just, well, there's 9 characters, so I roll a d10? Because here, built into this system now, we have the option to choose the character or choose the thread. So as I said, let's say there was 7 characters on here, okay? And you rolled a 2 on your d4. Well, then you roll a d10, and let's say you get a 6. Well, that means this is the character right here, character number 3. That's who it pertains to. But, again, you've got 7 characters here. Let's say you rolled a d4 and you got a 4, and then you rolled an 8. Well, there's nothing in 8 except the word choose, which means you can now choose which character that NPC action pertains to. Or you can roll again. You can always roll again if you want to. But I kind of like that. I kind of like that it builds in this system to be able to give you the option to kind of reduce some of the chaos around the character, because that's kind of what this does. Anytime you have the option to choose sort of which way the narrative is going to go, to my mind, it represents a lessening of the overall chaos of the world. So I kind of like that that's built in here. And also it's rolling dice, and yeah, I love rolling dice. So okay, so that is the as far as I can tell, that's sort of a big addition to this, or not really an addition. It's a slight alteration. And then we come into this. This is the event meaning. Now, this is what Benjamin was talking about, because in the first edition, there was just action and subject. That was what it was. Action, subject, you put the two words together when you're trying to determine the meaning of the event, and you interpret from there. So we still have that, as we can see right here. There it is, the old table. And I'm not sure if this is the exact same table as the first edition or not, but I'm sure it's close enough. Action 1, action 2. So if you roll 49 and 37, you're going to get heal and group. Heal, group. Well, obviously you can't interpret that unless you know what the context is, but that's going to tell you a lot. And for me, that is very often enough to tell me everything I need to know to continue. Because, and something that is talked about in these rules and in these examples, is interpretation of these event meanings. These words are there to provide a starting point for your imagination. You can take them literally. Sometimes they work really well when you take them literally. If you're in a room with a bunch of sick people and a random event happens and it's heal group, well, to me, that means the doctor shows up, right? But you don't have to take it literally. All you have to do is allow it as to fire your imagination point. It's a jumping off point for you to think about what it could mean. So this is the general table. This is the main table. This is the one that, is of most use to me. But then we get here. Now we have descriptions. Generously healthy, interestingly rustic, officially enormous, whatever. This is an alternate way of determining the event meaning. And then we have these locations, characters, and objects. When I first saw this, I'm not going to lie, my first thought was too much. If you throw too many options at me, I go into choice paralysis and I shut down. And if I shut down in the middle of trying to maintain a momentum in the storyline of the game, that's going to kill me. However, when you read the examples in here, and again, there's a bazillion examples, it's very clear these things are just there as options if you so choose. So for example, let's say that you roll a random event and the event focus says, introduce a new PC. Well, you might roll on the old table, the standard table, or you might go, you know what? We have got this fancy-dancy character element thing here. I'm going to roll on that first, and I roll classy and official. Classy and official. That tells me a lot about that person right out of the gate, based on the context. Now, I will tell you that for me, when I use this, I tend to go from the big picture down to the specifics. So I am very likely to use the main table first to get a sense of the action, to get a sense of what is going on in general, and then I will roll again on these tables to narrow it down. So if we introduce a new NPC, just to give you an example that I'm making up right now, and I roll befriend suffering. Again, I don't have the context, but let's go back to the room with all of the sick people, let's say, just because I already said befriend suffering. Well, that's a random event, and let's say it's introduce a new NPC, befriend suffering. Well, to me, befriend suffering, that's like a nurse. That's like the new NPC is a nurse that is really compassionate and is really like going above and beyond to help these sick patients. So much so that our main character, notices. But then I might say, okay, all right. So befriend suffering could be a nurse. Yeah, could be a nurse. In fact, I really like that idea. So let's go down and get a character description. And we get creepy and questioning. Okay, so now we know a little more about this, and it changed it, didn't it? Befriend nurse or befriend suffering. So she's really helping these patients above and beyond. Creepy and questioning. Well, now there's a reason why there's clearly a reason, and a very creepy reason why she's being so close and nice to these people is because she's trying to get some information out of them. So that adds a whole new level of that character right there. Boom! Oh, wow, that's so cool. Or let's say that the random event deals with an object, something that shows up that is of interest. Well, you could do the standard table, or you could go to your objects table. Communication and ornamental. Communication ornamental. If it's a modern day game, you might say, oh, that's a really expensive cell phone. Or depending on the year it's happening. I'm running a vampire game right now that's set in the year 2004, so that might be a car phone. Ooh. We had cell phones in 2004. I don't know what the hell I'm saying, but the point is, again, it all comes back to context. So, Ben, to address your question, you said that I find I can struggle to pick which tables to use more than before when it was just action and subject. I understand that. I get it. Again, these are just options. I would stick with the core table and then build out from there if I needed to. And then we talk about interpreting the event through the lens of expectation, and if you need more information, and mining for meaning. That's something I do all the time. So the example here is another way to figure out what a random event means when you're stuck for interpretation is to do another meaning roll to see what additional information an extra pair of words suggests to you. So those of you who've watched my show know that there's many, many, many times where I will just out of the blue go, what is the nature of this thing? What is the nature of this? Oh, Simon of Argiston stumbles across a strange marking on a tree. What is the nature of that? And then I go to the chart, and that chart gives me 2 words. Boom. Now, I could use the object chart, or I could use the descriptor chart, which is one of the new optional ones involved here. The point is those charts are there as options. So for me, I always stick with the main, but I know that I'm supported with the other ones if I want to change my mind. Change my mind. And then here again, look at this, the big random event example. So another huge, big example at the end of this section. I just love that. Very, very, very handy. Scenes, elements of a scene. The lists, the scene structure, playing and bookkeeping. The lists of a scene, we've already seen. Ha, 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 ha. Seen what I did there? The lists are threads and characters. The threads are story threads that come up. Okay, and it's listed right here, the threads list. Threads are the quests, tasks, and missions you choose to pursue through your player character. Anything at all. In season 3 of Me, Myself, and I, a handful of Edward's very first threads, which we started at the very beginning of the game with, because he was a character that was carried over from the first season, was find out what he's doing on this island, find a way to deal with Sherilyn, and deal with the Order of the Purifying Flame that was chasing him. Those were the 3 threads. And more very quickly came up as you play, right? So you list your threads as you go on that handy-dandy list, which is all now grouped, which is kind of cool. Same thing, if you roll one on that list that doesn't have anything, you can choose. You can choose the thread. And then we have the characters list, exact same thing. Characters are typically people. They don't have to be. They could be locations. They could be groups, and they could be objects as long as those objects have some agency of their own. Like, for example, in season 3, the soul cage was a giant important object in the whole season, but it didn't really have agency on its own, so it wouldn't have gone on the character list. And then we talk about scene structure. This is just basically for people who've never done this before, how to start a scene, whether it's an inspired idea like I had when I started season 3. Actually, let's talk about this a bit, because in season 1 of the show, Simon of Argiston, his first scene was determined randomly. It was determined via a random event and meaning tables, okay? I had just built the character randomly, and that gave me a lot of context. And then I rolled a random event, and that put him in media res. It put him in the middle of the action trying to save his friend from being executed. And that started the whole season, 22 episodes later. In season 3, it was a little different. In season 3, I started with an inspired idea. And the inspired idea was, wouldn't it be cool if Edward wakes up on a tropical island with no memory of how he got there? And that's all I knew. That's all I knew, and I loved it. Oh, yes, and then here you have, again, just a different way of starting your first scene. You could ask the 4 Ws, who, what, when, where, why, and you can just roll 4 times and try and put that stuff together. That's just for starting your scenes. You can get into the details of that as you read the book. We talk about expected scenes. So as you're playing the game, you go through the scene, and then what happens next? Well, what happens next is predicated upon what you, the player, think is the expected thing to do. Okay, well, I've just killed the orcs. Now, the expected thing is going to be to go into the cave, or I've killed the trolls, let's say, to take an example out of The Hobbit. We've just killed the trolls, and the next scene is to go into the cave where they were lairing and explore it. So the expected results there might be, well, we'll probably find some kind of trinkets or something they consider treasure, but not that impressive, okay? So it's at this point that we test the expected scene. What this means is, We know what the expected scene is. We've just killed the trolls. We're going to their lair. Now you roll a d10 against the chaos factor. And if you roll above the chaos factor, then the expected scene starts exactly how you thought it would. We walk into the cave and we find really nothing of interest, a few gold coins, let's say. But if you roll equal to or less than the chaos factor, then your expected scene changes in some way. And how does it change? Depends if you roll odd or even. If you roll an odd number within the chaos factor, it is an altered scene. And if you roll even with the chaos factor, it is an interrupt scene. What is the difference? Well, we go into a lot of detail about what these are, but basically, an altered scene it's like the expected scene, but just one or two elements have just been slightly adjusted. The party, the dwarves and Gandalf and Bilbo have killed the trolls. They're going into the cave, and the chaos factor is at 6, and they roll a 3. Oh, well, that's an altered scene. Well, maybe the alteration is, well, you know what? We expected to find nothing, but I think we find something. I think there's something of interest here. And maybe then we do our roll for description. And what does it come up with? Oh, it comes up with a couple of swords, Glamdring and Orcrist. Oh, looks like Tolkien was using this product. And then, of course, we have the interrupt scene. The interrupt scene is something that comes out of left field that you're not seeing coming whatsoever and literally interrupts the action. It becomes its own scene. The altered scene is still your scene as you expected it, but with just a slight alteration, hence the name. And the interrupt scene is, pow, where did that come from, right? Okay, so what I like about this version is altered scenes get a lot of treatment in the second edition where they really didn't get it in the first edition. The first edition I found the altered scenes were a little nebulous, a little like, I'm not exactly sure how to handle that, but no more. Here we have all kinds of strategies to deal with altered scenes. The next expectation versus a tweak versus ask a fate question, or look at the meaning tables for inspiration, or look at the scene adjustment table. This is a new thing. So if we go down here, the scene adjustment table basically means it's a randomized tweak. So you roll a d10 and consult the scene adjustment table to see what element changes in your expected scene. Remember, this is an altered scene. So let's say that the Bilbo rolls against his chaos factor, comes up with an altered scene, and he decides, let's do scene adjustment. And he rolls a 6. Well, that's add an object. And we roll in the table. Or we maybe just think, oh, I think there could be a magical sword in here. Ha ha ha. That's an altered scene. An interrupt scene might be, I don't know, a great eagle falls dead from the sky and blocks him in the cave all of a sudden. That's why I didn't write The Hobbit. That'd be a really stupid outcome. Anyway, the point is, people, is that this altered scene section gets a lot of love in this version, which is really cool. Okay. Steven says, that is exciting about altered scenes getting a better treatment. That was one of the places where I would get bogged down when I first started using Mythic. Me too. Yeah, me too. I had the same thing with altered. I was like, okay, but do I roll a new event or not? I don't think I'm supposed to. Well, that's not the case here. This is very, very clear about how to treat altered scenes versus interrupt scenes. Then we get the interrupt scenes. I don't think too much has changed with interrupt scenes. It's pretty much, a regular random event. And then you play out the scene, and then we have another couple of giant big examples and how to deal with twists and turns, how to begin and end a scene. Lots of interesting stuff on here. Here we have basically the second part of the adventure journal. So the first part is going to be the threads and characters lists, which we saw before, and now we've got the other part, which is the adventure title, and then scene summaries here. The current chaos factor, there's a big box there. There's a big box because that constantly changes with each scene, right? And then general notes down here. So that's pretty cool there. And it tells you down here your process. Test the expected scene against the chaos factor, play out the scene, update list, and chaos factor. And that's how that works. And then lots of stuff about how to start or end a scene. This is really good for those of you who don't feel you have a lot of control over pacing. A lot of people I talk to or I read about, they say, well, I just never know where a scene begins or ends. This section here is really good for that. Okay, so now we get into spots that I'm not quite as familiar with here. Elements meaning tables at a glance. So this must be, oh boy, are these all the elements tables that we are going to have from this point on? Oh my God, look at this. Look at this! Look at all of these options. Wow, is that in here? Is that in this book? Oh, and there they are. Oh, look at this. Oh, this is amazing. Okay, I love this. You know, too much option is a bad thing, but hey, this is a good thing because it's just all in one book, man. Oh, I love that. I love everything just kind of, compiled like that. This is fantastic. Well, this goes on and on and on. Character actions, combat. This is like the table in Ironsworn when you want to know what the enemy does. Well, he attacks and moves. Ooh, that's cool. If he's playing Pathfinder, then he moves and attacks and then moves again because of his 3-action economy. Anyway, respect Pathfinder. I'm not mocking anybody. Look at this. Okay, all right. So basically, this book means you don't need any other books, apparently. Oh, look at this. Dungeon traps even. So I use the Tome of Adventure Design. That's kind of what this reminds me of, all of the possibilities, although this is very straightforward. This is just all built into that core mechanic of determining your event meeting based on the chart. This is fantastic. For a guy like me, this is perfect because this is all just providing inspiration jumping off points. And that's what I love. Like, I'm not a huge fan of a bunch of different subsystems spread out over a bunch of different books because then I have to find them in the different books and that tends to kill my pace. But this... Oh yeah, I love this. I love this. This is the descriptions of the tables. And again, just examples after examples and little tips and tricks on how to use this. This is a wealth of information. Strategy for generating NPC actions. This tool is so robust. The GME not only acts as a GM, it acts as an NPC creator, it acts as a random object placement tool, it acts as a dungeon generator, it acts as everything, and it's the best thing about the GME is that it is all contained within its own little system. So you never get out of control. That's what I always loved about threads and character lists, is that you could always keep very careful track of who was what and who was where and what the interactions were and who were the important figures in the world as relates to the main character or characters. It's all just there. You know, people have often complimented me on the seasons of the show I do where it seems, oh, wow, it seems like a great story that all wrapped up at the end. Yeah, but that's largely because of this tool. This tool allows you to channel your imagination in such a way that nothing gets lost. You know, if you're aware, you gotta be aware. You gotta be on your toes, of course. You always gotta be on your toes. Conversations. Here we go. So this is what Une did as well. Une had a module in it that if you wanted to talk to the NPC and the GM didn't know what the NPC wanted to talk about, there was a conversation generator, basically, which is still really cool, and I'd still use that. End of scene bookkeeping. This is from the first edition as well. You add your list elements at the end of the scene. You add any threads. You add any new characters. Looks like there's some slight adjustments here. And then another, can you guess? Giant example. That's right. Another giant example. Oh boy. Wow. And we're not even, this is page 118 of 320. Oh, here we go. We get into variations now. Now I'm totally on new ground because I didn't work a lot with variations. The only variation stuff that I worked with, as far as I remember, is there was a Halloween episode in season 1 where I used the horror theme instead of the regular event focus table. It was a horror event focus table, which worked out kind of cool. It just adjusts a few things and adds a couple new possibilities as results in that table and stuff. So this stuff is all totally new to me, and to tell you the truth, I'm not gonna go through all of it, but it sure looks valuable because it gives, again, just chock full of advice. If anybody ever did not know what solo role-playing was or how to do it or how to basically be a better GM, this is the one, man. This is the one to look at. This is fantastic. Oh, look at this, determining NPC statistics. So basically you can do anything in this. All right, you know what? I'm getting verklempt here. I'm getting verklempt. World building. Wow, fantastic. Wow, fantastic. So good. Oh, thread progress. This is kind of looking like it was borrowed from Ironsworn on first glance, which is good because that's a really great way to track things. I'm going to have to dive into this later and maybe do a part 2 of this review because we're getting super long as it is. So I'm going to call it here for the YouTube version, but I'm going to continue on with my patrons and YouTube channel members and talk about this a little bit more. And I think at some point I'll probably do a bit of a deep dive on the second part of this book because I said I only got to the first half, through the kind of like the core stuff. If you are looking for a supplement that's going to help you in solo role playing or help you just be a better GM in general, man, this, you can do a lot worse than this one. This is really, really exciting. Like I said, this is the first time I've seen a lot of this stuff, and I'm genuinely excited to use it. So, yay! Okay, thanks YouTube. I'll see you next time on Me, Myself, and Die.